The Red Death had long devastated the country. No pestilence had ever been so fatal, so hideous. Blood was its avatar and its seal, the redness and horror of blood, the sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleeding at the pores, the scarlet stains upon the body and especially upon the face of the victim, were the best ban which shut him out from the aid and from the sympathy of his fellow men. And the whole seizure, the progress and termination of the disease, were the incidents of half an hour.
But the Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hale and light-hearted friends from among the knights and dames of his court, and with these retired to the deep seclusion of one of his castellated abbeys. This was an extensive and magnificent structure, the creation of the prince's own eccentric taste. It was toward the close of the 5th or 6th month of his seclusion, and while the pestilence raged most fiercely abroad, that the Prince Prospero entertained his 1,000 friends at a masked ball of the most unusual magnificence. The abbey was amply provisioned. With such precautions the courtiers might bid defiance to contagion. The external world could take care of itself. The prince had provided all the applications of pleasure. There were buffoons, there were improvisatori, there were ballet dancers, there were musicians, there was beauty, there was wine. All these in security were within. Without was the Red Death. That at the eastern extremity was hung, for example, in blue, in vividly blue were its windows. The second chamber was purple in its ornaments and tapestries, and here the panes were purple. The third was green throughout, so were the casements. The fourth was furnished and lighted with orange, the fifth with white, the sixth with violet. The seventh apartment was closely shrouded in black velvet tapestries that hung all over the ceiling and down the walls, falling in heavy folds upon a carpet of the same material and hue. But in this chamber only, the colour of the windows failed to correspond with the decorations. The panes here were scarlet, a deep blood colour. But in the corridors that followed the suit, there stood opposite to each window a heavy tripod bearing a brazier fire that protected its rays through the tinted glass and so glaringly illuminated the room. There were few of the company bold enough to set foot within the black room at all. Anon there strikes the ebony clock which stands in the hall of velvet, and then for a moment all is still, and all is silent save the voice of the clock. And then the music ceased as I have told, and the evolutions of the waltzers were quieted, and there was an uneasy cessation of all the things as before. But now there were 12 strokes to be sounded by the bell of the clock, and thus it happened, perhaps, the more thought crept with more time into the meditations of the thoughtful among those who revelled. And thus it happened too. It happened, perhaps, that before the last echoes of the last chime had utterly sank into silence, there were many individuals in the crowd who had found leisure to become aware of the presence of a masked figure which had arrested the attention of no single individual before. The figure was tall and shrouded from head to foot in the habiliments of a grave. The mask which concealed the visage made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse that the closest scrutiny might have had difficulty in detecting the cheats, and yet all this might have been endured if not approved by the mad revellers. But the mummer had gone so far to assume the type of the Red Death. His vesture was dabbled in blood, and his broad brow, with all the features of the face, besprinkled with the scarlet horror. When the eyes of Prince Prospero fell upon this spectral, he was seen to be convulsed, in the first moment with a strong shudder of either terror or distaste, but in the next his brow reddened with rage. "Who dares," he demanded hoarsely of the courtiers who stood near him, "who dares insult us with this blasphemous mockery? Seize him and unmask him, that we may know whom we have to hang at sunrise from the battlements." It was in the Easter or Blue chamber in which the prince stood as he uttered these words. They rang throughout the 7 rooms loudly and clearly, for the prince was a bold man, and the music had become hushed at the waving of his hand. There were found none who put forth hand to seize him, so that, unimpeded, he passed within a yard of the prince's person. He made his way uninterruptedly, but with the same solemn and measured step which had distinguished him from the first. It was then, however, that the Prince Prospero, maddening with rage and the shame of his own momentary cowardice, rushed hurriedly through the 6 chambers, while none followed him on account of a deadly terror that seized upon all. He bore aloft a drawn dagger and had approached rapidly. There was a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped gleaming upon the carpet, upon which instantly afterwards fell prostrate in death the Prince Prospero. Now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night, and one by one dropped the revellers in the blood-bedewed halls of their revel, and died each in the despairing posture of his fall. And the life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gay, and the flames of the tripod expired, and darkness and decay, and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all.